Hey guys, Excoundrel here. Today we're doing a tier list. Yes, we're going to be doing two different tier lists. One's for the early game and one is for the late game. I have put both of the pictures at the start of the video so that if you've come here just for the tier list picture, you can watch it and use the picture to however you like without watching the rest of the video. The rest of the video goes through my explanation and why I put things where, but this is just the pictures of both the early game and the late game tier list. The early game tier list is units that cost between 1 and 3 gold and how I think they impact the early game. So the higher they are, the more likely they are to help you generate a win streak and the more important they are in the early game. This is the late game tier list. This is from round 20 onwards, level 8 onwards, realistically, because the legendaries are getting involved. And this is both ranked on their individual impact, but also how integral they are to certain builds in the game. For instance, you'll see Dragon Knight and Tortola Elder, not so great units by themselves, but are absolutely integral to mage builds and dragon builds and knight builds. So this is my opinion on the late game tier list. Again, it's good to watch and get my explanations for them, but if you want both of the pictures, I've put them right at the start of the video for you to use as you will. Right guys, I'm going to do this tier list in a different way this time. I'm going to do it like actively and talk about them one by one as I drag their pictures onto the screen. In fact, I might try and make this a bit bigger for you guys so you can see the pictures a little bit more clearly. There, yeah, so you only need to see the actual tier list. You don't need to see the pictures themselves. You'll see them dragged on. I'm going to do an early game tier list, and then I'm going to do a like late game tier list. So the early game tier list is going to mainly consist of units of like 1 to 3 stars, okay? So I'm not going to include 4-star and 5-star units in the early game tier list because they are, sorry, 1 second. They are less likely to show themselves. I'm also going to quickly turn on my light so that you guys can actually see the background. So yeah, early game tier list is primarily going to be 1 cost, 2 cost, and 3 cost units. The late game tier list will be everything, and I'll switch it around for that. So I'm going to start with, let's have a look, Taboo Witcher. Taboo Witcher is an interesting pick. I think I would put him somewhere between B and A. Now, Taboo Witcher himself has got pretty bad stats. He's not very tanky, and he doesn't have an ability, which makes him very bad as a unit, you know, as a whole. But his ability is that he shreds mana. So if he is positioned well, and luckily positioned well, especially going up against something like a Skybreaker, if you stop a Skybreaker ultimate getting cast, that makes Taboo Witcher good. But he's not a good unit that you can pick and say, damn, happy that I got Taboo Witcher. And he also only lends himself to a very few builds. He lends himself to a full demon build, which isn't very good, and he lends himself to a feathered build, which is not a top tier build right now. And he's not worth including just to shut down a single demon. So you know, I think somewhere between A and C, I'm going to stick him. I'm probably going to put him in B because he has got his uses. Like, he's not a terrible early game pick. Frost Knight. Frost Knight is better in the early game than he is in the late game. The reason Frost Knight is good in the early game is because his ultimate increases the damage that he does to single targets. And when there are a lower amount of targets and they're all grouped up, his ultimate will hit, or his ability will hit multiple people, making his damage ramp up fairly well. So he's good in the early game, but he does fall off pretty much in the late game. I would say that because there are a lot of good Knight synergies early, like Hell Knight you can pick up, and things like Lightblade Knight, that makes him slightly more valuable, and the fact that he is much better in the early game in terms of the single target damage because everybody's grouped up than compared to previously. So I'd put him in A tier for that. Red Axe Chief. Red Axe Chief is very versatile. However, he is just strictly one of the worst statted and damaging like 1-cost carries in the game. I would put him somewhere around the same as Taboo Witcher. I would pick Red Axe if I want to go for a Cave Clan bonus, which is very good early game. But actually, as a unit individually, that's not really what makes it. Unit individually, he's not particularly good. In fact, none of the Cave Clan units are particularly good early game, but it's the synergy that they get that makes it matter. So I'd put him somewhere on the B tier. Like, I would pick him up if I was going Warriors. I would pick him up because Cave Clan is good early, but I wouldn't choose him over some of the other picks in the game. In fact, actually, I'd probably put him on the same level as Frost Knight, this guy Frost Knight, because I don't think that I would prefer to have Frost Knight and Red Axe over Taboo Witcher, for instance. All right, Skull Hunter. Skull Hunter for me is about the same as Red Axe and Frost Knight. For some reason, he is much worse in the mobile version than he is in PC. Like in PC, he's a really good 2-cost. In mobile version, his damage is really, really lackluster, and I don't know if he's supposed to, but his axes don't seem to do any damage on the way back. They only seem to do damage on the way out and then don't do any damage on the way back, which I'm not sure if it's a bug or is intended, but his damage is severely lacking, for a unit. In fact, I would never really pick him unless I was going Hunters, to be honest, even over Cave Clan, because I would much rather have Swordman over Cave Clan, so I'm actually going to move him down one. Soulbreaker, S tier. Skybreaker, S tier. Both of these are S tier early game units. You get them to level 2, they can single-handedly carry you through the early game. They can help you net a pretty healthy win streak. You can keep them until about round 15, round 16, and if you're not going Goblin Mechs, you can sell them for something else. They are just incredibly good early game units. Most people will try and contest over these unless they are trying to go for something different like a Tusk Champion. But these guys are, in my opinion, the best 1-costs in the game. In terms of early game power. Hell Knight, really, really good 2-cost unit. It's a demon, he's got a great stun, his damage is really good, he's pretty tanky. There are some knights that he can work in for a sort of a 2-cost, a 2-piece knight bonus. I think that Hell Knight is one of those units that a lot of people will just pick up. I don't think it's quite like Soulbreaker, Skybreaker tier, but I think that Hell Knight is an incredible unit, and I think a lot of people will want him. In fact, I'm actually going to move everything down because I realize how clumped up this is going to get for the time being. But yeah, Hell Knight is very good. Evil Knight, kind of bad. Unfortunately, Evil Knight is got low damage. His ultimate is only useful into melee compositions, and if I'm honest with you, he's probably one of the worst knights that you can pick up in the early game. So I don't really like him. The Source, E tier. The Source is only useful in mage compositions. There are some limited circumstances where I would say that the Source can work out in the early game, but frankly, she is a useless early game unit. No one has an ability in the early game where I'd be like, bam, I want that ability cast ASAP. No one, not in the early game, not between a 1 and 3 cost. Maybe Argali Knight. But yeah, I think the Source is probably one of the worst early game units you can go. Egursis Ranger. Egursis Ranger is good because it builds into Hunters. It's also a pretty high DPS unit. It also allows you to open up for the Egursis buff with Knights, with Evil Knight. I would rate her slightly above Evil Knight, Red Axe and stuff, but not as high as the likes of Hell Knight and Soulbreaker. She's a good early game unit. Very good if you want to pick up the early Egursis bonus, which is the only reason that Hell Knight might be between these two here. In fact, maybe I should move Hell Knight up for that reason, just because the Egursis buff is pretty good early game. Unicorn. I would say Unicorn is on the same tier as this is difficult because her healing is actually really good in the early game, and actually can make a significant difference. I think it's often massively understated how good she is in the early game in terms of bringing the beast bonus, but also bringing the healing. Her heal, if you put her on the front line and get the heal off early, can make or break particular fights. So actually I'm going to put her S tier because I think she's also easy to upgrade to level 2, and her healing's really good. Okay, Whisperwood Seer. He's not quite Source level bad, but he's pretty bad. He goes in D tier. Whisperwood Seer just isn't that good of a unit. Swordman. I think Swordman's an A tier unit. He's the best of the Cave Clan in the early game. His ultimate can be very impactful if you place him in the middle. He's got a big spin and it can do a lot of damage. He's not like a unit that I would pick up individually unless I have a warrior or a Cave Clan bonus in mind. However, he is probably one of the better early game warriors in Cave Clan units because that spinning ability can be so impactful. Flaming Wizard. I actually would think now, after having tested her quite a lot, she is one of the better mages. She does fall off in the late game, but she is one of the better mages in the early game because she's got such a high damage ultimate. She can basically single target zap any unit in the early game. So I really like the Flaming Wizard as a good early mage. She does fall off. You have to build her more attack speed focused if you want her to be as strong as her early game prowess is in the early game. But yeah, I think after testing, Flaming Wizard is a good early game unit, especially with the changes. But she's not like a unit that I would slot into any composition. I would pick her up if I felt like she was going to play a part in my sort of mid game somewhere. Lightblade Knight. This is a difficult one to place. My gut reaction is put her in B. But if I was playing Knights, I would always pick up a Lightblade Knight because it's good. The discrepancy here with Lightblade Knight is that, in fact, I don't think she's better than Red Axe and Frost Knight. The issue with Lightblade Knight is that at level 1, her damage is bad, and all she serves to do is charge the enemy's ultimates more quickly. Because her bounces, her ricochet bounces, they bounce on the enemy backline, giving them mana. So she basically gives the enemy free mana at level 1. But at level 2, she's really good, because she gets 110 damage, and suddenly she starts doing some serious damage. And she's also a unit that I would pick up in most circumstances for Knight builds, because she's one of the main Knight carries. So yeah, I think it's a bit unfair to give her the same level as Frost Knight and Red Axe, but she's definitely in between these two tiers. I'm almost tempted to create a tier for her by herself, which is actually what I'm going to do. And it's going to mess it up. I'm going to just call this A/B. Because she's not bad, but like her bounces at level 1 are really bad. And you wouldn't put her on the field as a level 1 unit. You'd need her really as level 2, unless you were going for a Knight bonus. That's my personal opinion. Lichen, or Werewolf. He is between S+ and S. I think I'd happily put him in S. He's got such good early game presence with the fact that he summons 2 wolves. That makes him really strong. I think this is triggering me actually. I'm going to rename all of these. Sorry guys, I've ruined the color scheme as well. E, F. You can't see the source anymore. I'm going to move this up. There we go. You can see a source now. I think S tier for Werewolf. He's a really good... I actually put Werewolf in compositions that I don't even plan on going Beast or Warrior in, because he just... Like, sometimes those wolves can soak some damage and just give you a chance of winning the round. So that's my opinion on Werewolf. I think he's very good. Water Spirit. I think Water Spirit is A tier. I think Water Spirit is A tier because his ultimate got buffed very recently. I would only really include him in Assassins or if I'm going to run a Spirit, but in conjunction with that, I think Stone Spirit is A tier as well. I think Water Spirit actually is arguably better than Stone Spirit, but they really only work in conjunction. But these two units, if you can combo them in the early game, the Spirit bonus is insane for loose streaking, for beating neutral rounds, and they work really well to help give you massive advantages in the early game. So I think those two, I'd say like Spirit as an early game combo is like really good, but the actual units themselves aren't fantastic, especially Stone Spirit. He's not a great unit, but Water Spirit with the buffs he got a couple of updates ago is pretty solid, and I would definitely consider them both as unison in A tier. Feathered Dragon, he's basically E tier. He's not that good in the early game. Gets better at level 2 and level 3, but like a level 1 unit, I would never field. I would never, ever, ever field, unless I was desperate or running some sort of feathered combo, never field a Feathered Dragon in the early game. Just, it's not worth it. It's just not good. Argali Knight, S+. Argali Knight in the early game, even as an individual unit, is an S+ unit in my opinion. 200 true damage and a heal in an AoE around him or the target. Insane. Just so good. Really good unit. Shadow Crawler. She's a 3-cost and she's imperative for Feathered and Assassin builds, but as an individual unit without the Assassin bonus, not very good. She is a unit that's integral in the late game for her Assassin builds. She's almost one of the most important assassins to have because she's your damage dealing assassin. Like, she crits for the most damage, right? But as an early game unit, I would never include her. Thunder Spirit, S plus tier. He's significantly better than his Spirit counterparts. He provides you with a Spirit bonus with Stone Spirit. His damage is really good. Actually, that's a lie. S. He's not as good as Argali Knight and these guys. Those guys are in a tier of their own. But he's a very, 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 very good carry. And I think, even just one of in the early game, especially if you've got the Spirit bonus, is so good. He's also one of the tankiest mages in the game at level 1. I think he's got 750 HP, which is actually insane. Phantom Queen, S. She has got a lot of damage. She falls off very hard, very quickly. But her ultimate, if you can get it on all of the front line, if you put her directly behind your own front line, is really strong. She's one of the stronger demons to have in the early game. Definitely think she's worthy of this position. Lord of Sand, E tier. As a unit as well. He's more useful than the Source, which is why I can't put him on the Source level. but he's not particularly useful in the early game. I don't think I'd ever choose him as one of my early 3 assassins. He only gets slightly better as the game goes on because he's a disruptor and he's got a good ultimate when there are more targets to hit. But when you've got like 4 or 5 targets, especially if they're all split up a little bit, he's just not that good. This is Defector. Defector is okay. Defector is okay, simply because he can hex a target, and that can be really useful. I would never like actively buy him unless I was thinking that I had nothing else, or I was probably looking for a late game Glacier build. But Defector is okay. I can't really bash him. Shadow Devil. Shadow Devil can go in B tier. The reason Shadow Devil goes in B tier is that he's a good unit. I would happily have him as my singular demon, but realistically he's not strong until level 2, and he is really only going to shine in demon and mage builds. You probably don't put him in any other builds at all. But he's a decent unit who does quite a lot of damage with his basic attacks. He's got a good ultimate, and I would happily have him as my only demon if I had the choice, you know, or not even if I had the choice, if I didn't really have that much of a choice. Ogre Mage, believe it or not, he's better than in the early game. He's all right because there are less targets for him to give the attack speed to. He's pretty tanky. I would build him if I thought I was maybe going to be going mages. I probably wouldn't build him in many other circumstances. But Ogre Mage is an all right early game unit. I think like he's deceptively better than you'd expect. Like, I think he's okay. I think he will do his job. He will fall off in the late game, obviously, but he's definitely better than the source, so I can't put him in that tier. Abyssal Crawler. Abyssal Crawler is an okay unit. Definitely better now it's 2 cost. In fact, actually, probably move it up to B tier because it is now 2 cost and I forgot. Abyssal Crawler only gets better at level 3 and level 2. He is definitely an assassin that you still want to include in your assassin compositions. He's not, he or she actually, I don't exactly know if it's a he or she. But it's not exactly going to be like a powerhouse carry for you in the early game. It's about as good as a Phantom Assassin or a Shadow Devil or a Light Blade Knight, in my opinion. Abyssal Gard is a good warrior, and Abyssal Gard actually don't think it's as good as the S tier units that we've listed here, but Abyssal Gard is a solid A tier unit. He's got really good base stats, great attack speed. His ultimate is good when there are less targets to choose from because it's randomly allocated. The armor shred is insane if you're running a warrior composition in the early game. So yeah, I think Abyssal Gard is a good game. I pick him up if I'm going warrior every time. He's an integral warrior for me. Dwarf Sniper. I think Dwarf Sniper is good. I think Dwarf Sniper is a good high. He's got high base stats. He's obviously an auto-include if you're trying to build an early 3 hunter comp. And, you know, I think he's about as good as an Abyssal Ranger. Probably a little bit better than an Abyssal Ranger, but, like, I'm not going to be screaming for a Dwarf Sniper unless I'm building Hunters. But because he is so good in Hunters, he can go in the A tier. I have now been playing a bit more of Fallen Witcher, and I think Fallen Witcher is genuinely an S tier. He's quickly becoming like an include as a singular demon for me, especially if I've got a backline that he can steal HP from, because I think he's just got that kind of carry power. I think there's a video that I'll upload this week that shows you what I did with a Fallen Witcher in the early game, and I think he's just genuinely a very powerful unit. I genuinely do. So I think Fallen Witcher is a good, powerful unit. And I would include him as my one-off demon as long as it didn't break any synergies that I had built up in the early game or over like a 2-cost unit, for instance. Ripper. I think Ripper's S tier. There is a warrant to say Ripper is S plus tier, but I wouldn't include Ripper in my composition unless I was going Goblin Mech. When I'm going Goblin Mech in the early game, he's an incredible unit. But I wouldn't include him in my composition if I wasn't going Goblin Mech. He's actually, out of the 4 Goblin Mechs, Soulbreaker, Skybreaker, Heaven Bomber, and Ripper, he's actually the one that I would choose the last to put in unless I thought I was going, or I needed him to complete a goblin bonus, or I thought I was going Goblin Mech. But his true damage ultimate is pretty strong when everyone has got low HP. It's good versus early knight bonuses. It's great versus early warrior bonuses. He's a good unit. Heaven Bomber. I think Heaven Bomber is worse than Soulbreaker and Skybreaker, but he is a great unit. And if I can 2-star him, I will include him in a lot of my early compositions. I don't usually include him as a 1-star, unless I've got Goblin Mech. But as a 2-star, I will definitely just put a Heaven Bomber in, because the damage from his ultimate can be absolutely clutch. It's a lot of damage from his ultimate in the early game. And he is actually, in general, like, you'll see Goblin Mechs in the general in the early game are all quite highly rated, because it's the best early game synergy, in my opinion. Warpwood Sage. Warpwood Sage is garbage. And he is almost as garbage as Whisperwood Seer. I feel a little bad saying that, actually. I probably should move him up. Warpwood Sage is not good compared to the PC version. He gets better when he gets leveled up. He still isn't that tanky in the late game, but he is a necessary druid, and he is a druid that you will include in all of your druid feathered compositions, because he is kind of just the feathered tank. But he's slow attack speed. His ultimate takes forever to cast. I would usually never include a Warpwood Sage by himself in my composition. Tusk Champion. Tusk Champion is definitely an S tier. He sets up for Beast Warrior. He's got a really good single target burst in the early game. And in general, I think he is an incredibly good early game warrior to choose from. You can see there's a lot of choice from in the S tier. I think he's a very, very, very good early game warrior. And if I'm not picking either Soulbreaker or Skybreaker in the early game, I'm picking Tusk Champion most of the time, because it gives me more flexibility. He's a very flexible pick. All right, Wormy Boy. I think Wormy Boy is A tier. I don't think he's S tier. I think Wormy Boy works best in Warrior Beast compositions. There are a few other compositions where I think Wormy Boy works well in, but I think he's a really, really good unit. I do include him when I get the opportunity to. He's got a really, really powerful level 2. I give you the caveat, if he gets a mana item like Magic Crystal or Elf Headwear, he's S tier, because you can just spit out so many of those little plague wards. But without it, he's just an A tier unit. He's good. I sometimes include him by himself. Don't always, but I sometimes include him by himself. Desperate Doctor. Just for the early game, and people will disagree with me on this, just for the early game, Desperate Doctor is an S tier unit for me. I actually include Desperate Doctor on certain rounds because his ultimate is so impactful on low numbers of targets. You've got 3 targets clumped up. It bounces 5 times. It's going to knock a stun into all of them and deal damage across the entire composition. He is a massively underrated unit, I think. Massively, massively underrated unit. Venom, E tier. No, don't need to talk talk much about it. He's garbage. Venom is just hot garbage. And Windranger. I'd say Windranger is S+. His ultimate is, frankly, almost irreplaceable in the early game. I get so thirsty talking all the time. I think I include him in compositions by himself. I think him and Nagali Knight are the 2 units outside of Soulbreaker and Skybreaker that I would actively randomly include in a composition. Not only do they give me the option then to potentially go into Hunters or Knights, but they actually have some of the most impactful ultimates. Windranger's ultimate early on, if it is placed right, can just crush an early composition really, really quickly. So that's my view, and I think there's a lot of weighted up towards the S and A tier, because there are quite a lot of good early game units, you know, when they fit into a composition. But that's my opinion on early game unit tier lists, okay? And I did them one by one, and so hopefully you guys, you guys will understand the ones I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm actually going to do this all on camera for the late game as well. Okay, so let's talk about late game. I'm going to start off with Evil Knight, because I'm just going to do it one by one, which I can see. Evil Knight. He is not fantastic late game, but he's not bad either. There's a lot of heavy melee compositions. I would say Evil Knight sits in C tier. He's like a knight that you use to fulfill your knight obligations, essentially. Getting 4 or getting 6. He's actually, in my opinion, one of the weakest knights there is, apart from Frost Knight. I just don't rate Evil Knight in the slightest. Venomancer. I would say Venomancer is a B tier unit. His armor shred can be very useful and very important. He's good to add as a warlock synergy bonus, but otherwise not really used outside of Goblin Mechs. I use him sometimes in my Fallen Witcher build. I would sometimes use him as a warlock of choice if I couldn't find Dark Spirit, because his armor shred again is still pretty solid, but he's not a great unit. Taboo Witcher, actually A tier in the late game. Simply because like his ability, especially if you're running demon builds or feathered builds, or even if you just have him, his ability to cut mana in the late game can be incredibly important. Especially when actually, do you know what? That's too good for him. It's important, but you have silences as well. But he's very, very good at positioning wise, late game 1v1, searching for an important ultimate user, or important ability user, cutting their mana so they can't use that ability. So I think that Fallen Witcher is a good unit in the late game, better than he is in the early game for sure, but still not amazing. Red Axe Chief, garbage in the late game. He's only good with Cave Climb bonus. He's a good tank. So maybe we move him to D. He's a good tank. He will taunt, he will take some damage, he will definitely be good versus assassins if you put him on the back line, because he will taunt all the assassins to attack him. He'll buy you some time, but as an individual carry, he's not that good. Frost Knight, below Evil Knight. He's the worst knight. Just unless you're going like Glacier Knights, where he becomes a little bit more useful because he gets his attack speed up. He's one of the worst knights in the game. He's just significantly worse than a lot of the other knights in the late game. Skull Hunter, he is okay because he fulfills the 6 Hunter obligation, but he's kind of there because he fills the 6 Hunter obligation, not because you would actively look to pick him. Yeah, I don't think he's fantastic. Soulbreaker, he's a decent assassin, but to be honest, his single target burst becomes less relevant as the game goes on because the target is completely random, and he's actually one of the weaker assassins that you can have in the late game. So I don't think Soulbreaker is anyone's choice as a late game carry. Hell Knight does drop off. In fact, actually, no, Hell Knight doesn't drop off. Hell Knight is still a really, really, really good late game carry. If you can get Hell Knight to level 3, he can be like absolutely insane. I think Hell Knight is definitely still an incredibly good late game knight. Definitely think he's good. Skybreaker. He's probably the worst mech, to be honest. He's probably just the worst mech in the late game. Like late game, Skybreaker falls off like a truck. He is there to fulfill the goblin bonus. Good to 3-star, but still good to soak damage, but Ripper does it better. He's just not a good unit in the late game at all. Source. The Source moves up considerably in the late game because she is so crucial to her mage build. She's not an individually good carry, but she is crucial to her mage builds. In fact, almost want to put her in A tier because she is crucial to her late game carries. It's difficult to say, like, and a picture won't really do it justice, so maybe I should put her in the B tier. But she is absolutely crucial to her late game mage comps. Like, you can't run a mage comp without the Source because you want to cast your abilities as quickly as possible. Storm Shaman, I think I'm coming round to the fact that I think Storm Shaman is an S tier unit. I've started to see people include Storm Shaman as an individual one-off because the silence is so strong. The silence and the damage that he has now that he's been buffed, I have been including Storm Shaman in builds just to get the silence off versus hunters and versus mages, and it's really good. Really, really good. It's pretty good at countering a Dark Spirit as well if you can charge your ultimate quickly. Storm Shaman, I think, is a really good unit now. Doom, also just a good warrior, probably one of the best single carry warriors out there. That's why he's there. Dragon Knight, I'm going to move him up considerably from where he was previously. Dragon Knight is great in dragon compositions, and he's okay in knight compositions. Really good in Knight Glacier. But for me, still, like he requires certain circumstances to make work. Where I'm like, Hell Knight, Storm Shaman, and Doom are all just good. They're just good units that I'd put in. I would never put a Dragon Knight in without having a dragon composition or a knight composition. Egursis Ranger. She's decent. Like, a 3-star Egursis Ranger will do you really well in terms of carry potential. But honestly, there's nothing special about her. She's just a good unit. And if you get her 3-star, she's fantastic. If you get her 2-star, she's okay. But she's good, and she's one of the better. She's one of the better 1-stars that transition to the late game because she's got a passive, and that passive works really well. Unicorn. Unicorn falls off pretty hard late game. The healing becomes kind of irrelevant, and she gets superseded by Razorclaw in most compositions that want to use her as a beast. So that's why you see Unicorn drop off. Really good early game, not so good late game. Dark Spirit, absolute still S tier plus. I don't think I need to explain why. True damage, AoE, max percentage health, ultimate, insane. Whisperwood Seer is E, because he's just a bad unit. I can't really put it any better than that. Whisperwood Seer is just a bad unit. Helicopter is going to get S tier because he's started to see use in mage compositions with his ultimate dealing insane damage. He's also just a really, really good basic attack carry, and I think I've seen so many games now where Helicopter gets picked up and with the right items becomes MVP. Helicopter is just a good single carry, and I think one kind of an underrated unit from where I rated him last time. Swordman is good. He's okay. He's better than most of the other Cave Clan. His ultimate becomes a little bit lackluster in the late game. In fact, so much so that I'm tempted to move him down. His ultimate becomes a little bit lackluster in the late game, and you'd rather have him basic attacking during that time. So Swordman is just he's a good warrior, but he's not the best. Tortola Elder. Again, he's going in A tier because he's like crucial to mage builds. Tortola Elder needs to be in a mage build most of the time to make it viable late game. Not a unit that I would put in by itself, but it's a unit that I think is crucial for the mage builds. Pirate Captain, S tier. Absolutely, no, don't need to even ask the question. He's a really, really good unit. His ultimate is fantastic. He works in so many different compositions. I'm almost tempted to put Pirate Captain in S plus tier. I think I will put Pirate Captain in S plus tier. He's just used in so many compositions, and he's a unit that I will just put in if I find him, because his ultimate is just so good. His ultimate is just so good. Blight Sorcerer, going to go in the same tier as Dragon Knight and Tortola Elder. He started to see much more use. He gives you the Agursis bonus in Hunters, and he started to see much more use versus Glacier Clan, for instance, and also versus Warriors. So Blight Sorcerer is good. Flaming Wizard, not quite A tier, but this is the thing. If you're going to play her as just the mage, F tier. If you're going to play not F tier, maybe D tier. If you're going to play her as like the basic attack carry late game Flaming Wizard, she's actually could be very strong. And I think it's worth having her there in B tier. Razor Claw is an S plus tier unit. He gets included in so many compositions. He's so strong. The bear is a monster, and he's easy to upgrade to level 3 with the right druids. Yeah, I think he's great. Lightblade Knight. I think Lightblade Knight is an A tier unit, simply because she is very powerful in knight compositions. She's a good knight carry. She's great in feathered compositions when you're not running the assassin package. So I think Lightblade Knight is deserving of an A tier. She just does a lot of damage. You'll see her in the late game, level 2 or level 3. Her damage output is insane. So it's just she's like a crucial carry for a 6 knight composition, for instance. Werewolf, he's still an incredibly good unit in the late game. If you can get him to level 2 or level 3, he can be nigh on unstoppable. I think he's not quite S tier, but he's definitely A tier. He's a great unit. And it's F tier for our boy, Ogre Mage. Just useless unless you're in a 6 mage composition. Which, could happen. Siren, I think, because for Pirate Captain, I can put him on the front line, and he will get his ult off most of the time before he dies. Siren either needs to be level 2, or she needs to have some mana generation items on to get her ultimate off. If she gets her ultimate off, remember it takes about 2 seconds to cast, it's insane. Pirate Captain's ultimate is instant. Siren's isn't. They do similar things, but Siren is still a really good unit that I would include in a lot of compositions. Water Spirit late game. The more I've used Water Spirit, the more I'd like him in the late game. I think he's a really, really good addition to mage comps. Just because he does a lot of damage, he's also pretty good for assassin comps. He's a B tier unit. He can do really, really good team-wide damage with his ultimate. Soul Reaper. I think Soul Reaper is an A tier unit. I think you include him if you've got an Agursis buff when you've got Evil Knight on the board, or you include him in a Hunter comp when you're trying to get the Agursis buff with your Agursis Ranger, or he's like a go-to Warlock. I don't think he's S tier. I do think I would include him if I had the option and I had nothing else, but I think he's an A tier unit. Soul Reaper is just a good unit. Argali Knight in the late game is also still good. You do need to get levels on him. If he's level 1 in the late game, he's going to be useless, but level 2 onwards, Argali Knight is still incredibly relevant. True damage is really nice, and I think he's just a very good unit. Phantom Assassin, or Shadow Crawler, also an A tier unit. Like Phantom Crawler, Shadow Assassin is like if you need her She is your assassin carry if you're playing assassins. You need this unit in the late game if you're playing assassins. She's just really, really strong. So yeah, I think Shadow Assassin or Shadow Crawler is a really, really good unit when you're playing assassins. I wouldn't include her otherwise, but she's like crucial to assassin comps, and you're noticing that a lot of the crucial units are going on this level. Shining Dragon, I'm actually going to move to... no, Shining Dragon is good. Really good in Mage Dragon comps. And good for dragons. But he's significantly better than Venom, that's for sure. But he's not fantastic. Not a great unit, little dude. Phantom Queen drops off significantly from her early game prowess. She does her flat magic damage falls off really hard, but she's still a good include for linear DPS, getting to the back line. She does that AoE damage. She's a pretty necessary pick for assassin comps. Thunder Spirit is definitely S tier. He's an absolute beast of a mage in the late game. You need him at level 2 to make your mage comp work, and that's a fact. I'm actually going to put Lord of Sand in C tier because his ultimate's very useful. The CC that it provides can be incredibly good, and that's why I'm going to keep Lord of Sand. But he's not a great assassin in his own right, but he's good for the disruption. He's got good CC, but that's about it. Shadow Devil in the late game, I'm going to put him in B tier. And now I'm just reassessing what I've got in B tier right now. I'm actually going to move Skull Hunter down. He's not that good. Shadow Devil is really good. If you get into level 3, he's nigh on unstoppable, but he fits into demons and mage comps only, and he's not like the absolute carry. You can run a mage comp without Shadow Devil. It just helps to have him. Defector in the late game isn't so good. Like, getting a hex off can be really, really solid, and obviously hexing the right target can be amazing. In fact, he is just more useful than these D tier carries, to be honest. He is just more useful. That hex can actually be really solid. Abyssal Gard drops off in terms of his early game prowess. He's good. Great warrior to have. Gives you the option for a mage, for a marine bonus, but that's about it. I think now the nerfs have come through for Abyssal Crawler, he's probably a B tier assassin. He's still good at level 3, but he's nowhere near as good as he was. He just can't constantly ult all the time, and he can go down pretty quickly. Dwarf Sniper in the late game, awesome. He's an A-tier hunter. He does so much damage for you in a hunter comp. People often put a lot of their carry potential onto Dwarf Sniper, and that makes him really solid. Devastator is an A-tier. He's only really used for getting the Goblin mech together, but obviously he's pretty good against warriors and heavy melee comps. But he's not like an S tier. He's not as good as some of the other legendaries in the game right now. I think he stacks up with Blight Sorcerer in terms of utility. Shining Assassin is... The more I've played Shining Assassin, the less I feel like she's an S tier unit. I think she's about the same as Phantom Assassin. She's a really useful build for Feathered Assassin. She's really useful for Assassins, but she's not that great. She's not as good as I potentially thought she was. Late game, if you've got a level 2 or 3, specifically 3, Fallen Witcher, monster. That guy is a monster. He's hard to get there. He works in certain comps, but late game Fallen Witcher is an absolute monster. Tsunami Stalker is absolute S+ tier. He still has the most insane CC in the game. He gets included in so many comps purely for that CC. He's great. Ripper is the better of the low early game mechs, and so therefore he goes in B tier. His true damage remains relevant throughout the game, and he's the tankiest of the mechs as well. So that makes him probably the most viable of the late game mechs individually. Heaven Bomber is about as good as Skybreaker. A little bit worse than Soul Breaker because Soul Breaker fits into assassin comps, whereas obviously Heaven Bomber only fits into Goblin mech. But he's kind of crap late game. Really is just kind of bad. Stone Spirit in the late game. Honestly, he's really annoying. I actually think Stone Spirit is one of the worst warriors in the late game, because he will throw your target away from you into the other corner, and often that can be really bad. Like, if he throws a warrior that's still quite beefy into your backline, that's bad. You don't want that to happen. So, yeah, I don't think Stone Spirit's that good in the late game. Warpwood Sage is okay. Again, bad unit, really. I would say he's about on par with Unicorn, even. He's good in Feathered, and he's a good frontline for hunters as well, but he's just not a good unit. He takes too long to cast his ult. He's not tanky enough for what he is. And he's got a very slow attack speed, so he doesn't even generate the ult well himself if he's not getting attacked. Berserker is an S tier unit. He's not S plus because he's not so great by himself, but you would pick him into a warrior comp any day of the week, and obviously he's crucial for the Night Glacier, and he becomes an absolute monster late game carry. Tusk Champion, I'd say he's C tier. His ability falls off well into the late game. And he's just a good beefy boy. Like, he's a beefy boy, and he takes damage, but that's about it. I would say that Wormy Boy is a B tier unit in the late game. I don't think he's quite caliber of S tier, A tier, but he's really solid. You know, if you get the beasts and those plague wards on board, he's really good. I would say that Windranger is an A tier unit. I don't think he's like absolutely insane. He's better in the early game, especially when people have built up heavy night bonuses. Sometimes his ult can feel a little bit lackluster, but it is a ult that can have massive impact in the late game anyway. Most hunters in general are going to be pretty good, but I think both Dwarf and Windranger are the best hunters, you know, aside from Siren, that you're going to have on your... Oh, I guess they're just good, okay? Fine, they're just good. I would say that Venom is still bad. He's good in dragon comps, but you would never include him in your assassin comp, and he's there as a dragon filler. You only ever field Venom to make sure that you get the dragon combo. And Desperate Doctor, well, actually, do you know what? People underrate Desperate Doctor. I think he's not A tier, but at level 2 and 3, Desperate Doctor can hit his bounces across your entire composition, even if you've got 7 or 8 units. I think people massively underrate how important Desperate Doctor can be, and how impactful his ultimate can still be, even in the late game. But he's a good unit. But yeah, this is my tier list. I'm going to just quickly get it in shot so you can see all of it. This is my total tier list. This is how I feel about the late game carries. I've done the early game and I've done the late game, and I'll put them together for you. So if you have any queries or you sort of disagree with anything, please let me know. I've explained my reasoning, and you guys can discuss it to your heart's content. And I'll see you soon.